Hey everyone, welcome to the LIBERcast for the 19th episode. And I have the pleasure to have Scott Gordon once again to talk about this fascinating subject that is mind control and Psyops because they are linked together. So let's not lost sometimes and welcome again Scott Gordon to the LIBERcast. Thank you very much to be there.
Well, thank you very much for having me on again. I'm glad to be back.
So I'm gonna let you introduce, and then here we go.
All right, well, we've told everyone we're going to be covering psychological operations and how they're getting in the way of the freedom movement. And before we can get down to that, we have to cover what psychological operations are, or PSYOPs for short, and talk a little bit about how they work. So I'm not going to go very far into Michael Aquino, but some may recognize him as the controversial leader of the Temple of Set, who had once been in the Church of Satan, and is also lieutenant colonel in the Army. And by rumor that it's really hard to pin down and verify, he was reassigned to the NSA as a general in his last days. He passed away during the COVID pandemic year 2020. And I really have a strong feeling that his research and even maybe his operation was used as part of the whole COVID rollout. And we'll get to that when we get to that particular PSYOP. But in order to define what psycho operations are, we're going to use his 1980 concept because although he wrote the book Mind War and sort of advanced this to sort of a neutral, ethical type of operation that doesn't use lies or propaganda, unfortunately, we know that that's public relations on his part. And, you can read that in the bottom concept where he talks about cooperative, without recourse to violence. And he talks a lot in his book about not lying during the campaign, but he does say to use selective truths. So this is a manual for the officers in the PSYOPS division, whatever they're calling it now, in the US Army. So basically he says the 1980 concept of psychological operations or mind war is that essentially you overwhelm your enemy with argument. You seize control of all of the means by which his government and populace process information to make up their minds, and you adjust it so that those minds are made up as you desire. Now, one of the things that Michael liked to brag about, because he was accused of child trafficking and abuse and other things in a scandal, is that his material is actually beneficial to humanity because it alleviates the possibility of going into what he calls physical war, or PW, in his book. So he has a point. If this is part of the whole process of negotiating a peace rather than going to a hard war, then his proposals are actually humanitarian. But as we know, governments don't operate that way. The military doesn't operate that way. And so when you look at what he's saying, you're looking at presenting mind influencing operations as if they were neutral or beneficial. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk some more about how that plays out. Okay, so he also in his book gives you a degree of psychological operations. This is from Dr. Gregory Reese, one of the military psychologists. And on your first level is one that we all engage in. Information and education, very, very harmless sounding, and it's information and education is how we can negotiate peace and cooperation between nations, or amongst people, in the political realm. Number 2 would be persuasion. Persuasion is considered acceptable and harmless. Number 3 is compliance. Now we're starting to get into authority and the use of authority and the use of the power in government to persuade or force compliance. And we're seeing a lot of that in the current COVID-19 PSYOP. And the last 2, coercion and thought reform, are heavy-duty psychological operations, usually done in prisons or military prisons or prison camps. And we see those as coercion and thought reform. Those are the deep levels of PSYOPs. And they're normally considered illegal or immoral or unethical. And I put a little note myself here. Deception, when involved, should probably be considered a form of coercion. Okay, so if you're going to brag and say that you're not using any lies in your campaign, but there is deception, then you are in fact using a form of coercion. And Mark Passio has covered that in his teachings about ethics and the natural law behaviors, the natural law principles that are key to understanding.
Actually, there's a psyops existing in society, and it's ignorance.
Ignorance, right.
Yes, it's fear.
Ignorance and fear. Good. So
and I would add that I don't want to cut you, but I would add that the old government, the old society is a psyop.
Exactly. And I would classify ignorance and fear under compliance. Okay, so you're giving your compliance by not indulging or taking part in or partaking of information and education. Okay, so persuasion would be on the level that we usually understand it, watching videos and movies. Movies are always persuasive, videos are always persuasive. This presentation that we're doing right now is on the level of persuasion, persuading you to see it a certain way, or as well as information and education. But when we get into compliance, we're looking at a mutual compliance. You're choosing to comply, you're choosing to remain ignorant. And what was the other one besides ignorance you were pointing out? Do you remember what that was?
There's ignorance, and the thing is that the old culture, we know that culture are software for human beings.
Right.
Okay,
right.
So if the culture, if the society is based on mind control and psyops, it's always about psyops. Always, even cultural turning, the psychedelic era, the 60s and the 70s is a psyop. They tested drugs onto the masses.
Good, and I would put that under compliance, definitely, possibly some coercion if you're looking at drugs that are given involuntarily, but definitely in the range of compliance. So let's go to the next one, because we're going to be getting into all of that here. Okay, so this is one of Mark Passio's slides, just to illustrate for people who don't already know that there is a mental schism that's used in mind control. And there are 2 hemispheres to the mind that are basically intellect and intuition, the masculine or the feminine, the right side, the left side. And those who know about this split, the psychologists that are involved in these things, can easily drive you to one side or the other through various means of influence. And some people are already there. And that you can see in our division of politics. Because if you really think about it, politics makes use of this mental schism. You have two parties, and one party tends to favor the intellectual thinking, the rational mind, and the other side tends to favor the global, family, inclusive thinking. And you can easily assign which party that is wherever you are, because every country has its two-party system. So let's go on to the next. This is kind of the basis for mind control. Okay, so psyops depend on black and white thinking. Okay, so that's even more fundamental than the slide we just looked at and the two parts of the mind. The human mind at its optimum combines both holistic, big picture, and detailed thinking. That's the split in the mind that we just looked at. The right hemisphere, the left hemisphere. One deals with holistic, artistic, and the other deals with scientific, detailed thinking, math, numbers. Okay, so faced with a problem, the mind calculates survival by arriving at a correct decision that results in continued or improved survival. So what we're covering here is just basically some psychological basics that form the foundation of effective mind control, or psyops. So in case you didn't already know, the purpose of the mind is to be right. It's a servo mechanism. It means it's serving you. Your mind or your brain is a tool that you're using, and you build it to reflect reality and to make correct decisions. So the mind, if it could tell you what it's doing, if it was alive on its own basis, would tell you that it's trying to be right. Okay? So pressed to make a decision in any situation, the mind will either or both fill in missing data with best guesses, or use shortcuts to simplify and speed up the process. Okay, so this can lead to what we call oversimplification, which is used a lot in politics and propaganda. And so we know now that psyops depend upon this kind of black-white thinking. So it's very important to keep in mind, because the human mind, even I find myself all the time, if I don't make an effort, a conscious effort, the mind will often default to black and white thinking. It's just the easy shortcut type of thinking that says, okay, this is something I don't want to do. This is something I like. It's all based on associations. And the mind, in order to be efficient, will sometimes make very rapid associations or guesses and fill things in. And so accuracy is not necessarily a feature of the mind, especially when it's rushed and you haven't had an opportunity to evaluate all the data properly. So we can go on to
what is fascinating, is that the psyop is acting without anybody noticing it. So when you start with basis like that, you can, even your thoughts are not yours. Your character, your ego, your superego is molded into this collectivism we're living in. So you have, yes, imbalance into the brain that is like you can see it everywhere, but it's going over that. It's way deeper than that. It's because this is ingrained into the masses, into the aggregate mind, the mindset. This is in the mindset of people. There's so many examples we can brought up, but we're
No, that's a great point. And there's a subconscious group mind of the masses, that we're looking at mass psychosis in this current world that we're in. And there's these, and most of our evaluation, our decisions are based on subconscious impressions, and those can be manipulated and are manipulated by government propaganda, the media, especially advertising. So with all those things, even the conscious mind that's left over, the 5 to 10% that is not, taken up by subconscious processes, even those have two flaws, and that is the right and left hemisphere divide that we saw in the last slide, and we'll probably see in the next one again, and the black and white thinking. So there we go. So that's what I wanted to look at, is the randomness and the determinism. And this is very important because a lot of psyops depend on a belief that, life is deterministic. It's that right hemisphere imbalance that Mark Passio teaches about, where people are prone to accept just about anything that they're told and believe that the universe just is already there. It was created. There's little or no free will possible, and we're just along for the ride. So with that one, psyops are, very easy to pull, very easy. Now, the other extreme, where somebody is always looking for proof and evidence and, where's the science type of thing, which is a valid, we should all be doing that. And if we're thinking clearly, we're actually balancing these two tendencies. We're not specializing in one or the other. But the randomness side that you see there can result in over skepticism. And if we have time, we can talk about, at the end, about how there's a new psyop that I've seen developing, where people have become so skeptical from, learning that they're being fooled, learning about mind control, that they actually begin to think that everything is a psyop, and that works in the favor of those who are running the psyops. So you don't know who to trust. You're way too skeptical, and that is the left hemisphere imbalance. So let's go to the next one, and we'll really get into this. Okay, so this is my primary specialty is inner work, which is very related to psychology, or it's a form of psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but my primary work is inner work, and I'm developing that especially for use in the freedom, truth, justice movements. And one of the things that I realize that is very pertinent to the psychological operations is that right-hand column, okay? Because the cycle operations are going to be using they're going to be using all of these domains, okay? So the way these domains work is the top two domains are completely invisible, okay? They can't be reached by, as far as we know, by any technology that we know at present. And even the technologies that are quote unquote reading minds or getting into the electromagnetic field and actually seeing the pictures that you're thinking, that kind of thing, that's still on the second level from the bottom, which I entitled livingness. And that is observable through experiments or through electromagnetic fields that can convert in computers and show what people are thinking or what parts of the brain they are using. Okay, so let's go from that, and I'll expand on the other levels, because this is the level where most psyops are taking place, where the Facebook and the Meta universe that's rolling out are going to be using. They're going to be using the electromagnetic field. They're going to be controlling mental conditions, which are your attitudes, emotions, knowledge, and this is subject to manipulation. And of course, if we go to the bottom level, this is the level that everybody can see and agree on. It's the level of the five senses. You can see it. You know, scientific experiments are easy with it. You can show gravity by dropping two objects together, and that experiment shows us the visible material conditions and the results and the effects of action. So this is the physical universe. Okay.
So would you agree that all these stratas that you showed us are affected by Psyops?
They're all affected, but I wanted to point out that's a very good question, because this is a very important point. One of the things that people have to grasp here is the hope of defeating Psyops and how Psyops are not all powerful. Okay, Psyops can only operate, to the best of my knowledge and research, at the bottom two levels. Now, if you can create an effect on the bottom two levels, you can influence a person at his core. Let's go to the top. At your core, you are a spiritual being, okay? You're an eternal spiritual being, and they know that, and they can't get to you there. They can't make you change your mind. They can't make you believe something. They can influence you to go there and think that you did it yourself. So that's a very important point. So on the one hand, they seem all powerful, okay? They can do things to your subconscious that can actually give you thoughts that you thought were yours. But the more inner work you do and have done, and the more knowledge that you have, the less susceptible you are to Psyops, and you recognize what they're doing, and you recognize that those thoughts are really not yours. They don't originate from you. Then you're operating at the top two levels. The top two levels are pretty much secure from Psyops unless you yourself are damaged and have not worked on, the inner work to fix that damage. So you have at the top, you have decision. This is where cause and the plane of cause and effects this is where you are cause. We are all beings that are causing things to happen. And Mark Passio talks a lot about the collective aggregate cause of our current condition. Okay.
Yes.
That's where that comes from. We're at core spiritual beings. It doesn't come from the animals so much. I'm sure they have they have some degree of, certain animals have some degree of that, but by and large, they come from beings that can understand and process information, human beings, and if you want to believe, alien races as well. But any spiritual being would fall in that category. Now let's go to the mental, because this is one of the most powerful areas here. This is your deep subconscious knowledge. And again, I said they're working at the bottom two levels, but they want to get into that level because that's the closest to you. That's the closest to your decision. That's your intentions and purposes. Okay. So we all know that, they can convince us to vote for one guy or the other, but they can't really change. If you think about it, they don't have a hard time changing our intentions and purposes. If you like a certain band just because you like that music and you're told to listen to these other bands by advertising and even by friends, sometimes, some people that have some inner strength and they just don't go for whatever fad that's coming along. And you can recognize these people as strong individuals.
It depends how your parent raised you. Your caretaker, yes.
Yeah. So people who are strong and have done the inner work processing have powerful intentions and purposes. And this is also where Mark Passio talks about the willpower and how this is where the will comes from. the top three levels. You know, obviously it comes from your decision, it comes from your intention and purpose to get something done, and it comes from enlisting your emotions in that whole process. So he has some very good presentations about using thought, emotion, and action together to accomplish your purposes. So I just wanted to point out to people that psyops are not inevitable, and psychological operations or mind control is not inevitable. They work. They put billions of dollars, maybe trillions, into perfecting their psychological operations, and they still cannot get to you as a spiritual being, which is why it's so important. Mark teaches about morality, because morality is how you keep that inner strength and you keep that integrity inside so that psyops cannot get to you. And sometimes we're persuaded by psyops, but we know there's something off, you know, and I'm going to admit to several psyops that I've been victimized by as we get to looking at what they actually are, the different ones.
I just want to add that psychological warfare, it can be used as intergenerational weapon. So they can do psychological operation onto people, and then these people have children and are actually using this psyop unknowingly on their children. So it's not always the government or agencies that are guilty of it. People are actually doing it willingly.
Right. And the dark occultists know this, and they've been implementing various psyops over generations and over centuries, all the way back from at least the days of Rome, days of Egypt and Babylon. They've known about this technology and they've employed it. And you made a great example. I had trouble thinking of any examples, but in that mental plane that we're looking at, the second one down, what you just talked about describes a way that they can get into our deep subconscious patterns by intergenerational abuse or intergenerational psychological warfare. So, yeah, comment fifth generation warfare.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely applies here. So let's look at the next one, because we're going to start looking at individual psyops. Okay, so this is just to summarize some of the things we've talked about. Major psychological operations depend on certain fallacies, logical fallacies or fallacies in thinking. We've talked about black-white thinking, the tendency of the mind to be a little bit lazy. We've talked about identifying with politics, the tendency of the mind to go to the left or to the right, politically, or in the male-female mental imbalance. Okay, we've talked, Mark Passio's talked a lot about belief in government as a fundamental, long-running psyop on this planet. And that's the idea that any group can ever define, manage, or adjudicate natural rights. So they've got people believing, we all know that most people believe in government and believe in politics, and that they haven't quite thought through, they haven't been given the proper education to think through what natural law rights are and how they're not able to be assigned to governments or groups or anybody else but the individual. Okay, so individual rights are inherent and we are sovereign beings. Okay, there's another psyop that's run that we probably would recognize from the Nazi era. Goebbels, the propaganda minister, said the bigger the lie, the more people are going to believe it. This is called the reverse blockade, and that is in a book called Political Ponerology, a very good book. It's very advanced for those who really want to get into deep psychology and the study of evil. Okay,
we could share a link if you have a PDF somewhere on the internet, or so we can. I would be really interested in it. So if you
Yeah,
can,
I'll show you the book here, Political Ponerology. The author's name is so long, I don't want to give it here because it would take a while. It's a Polish name, but you can find it easily on the internet. It's called Political Ponerology. Very, very good book. It took me a long time to get through it. It's a deep study. And then there's what I call, for lack of a better term, the one or the other fallacy. And this is very common. We hardly ever think about this. When we find, as parents or teachers, we find two kids fighting, it's really easy to lapse into this. One of them's good, the other one's bad, kind of a thing, or political candidates. One of them's evil and one of them's our hero saint. So the one or the other fallacy is very related to these other ones, black and white thinking, and it's another version of that. And it says that it's either true or false. It can't be both. Now, once in a while, it is completely a lie. So unless one or the other is a lie, it's often both. And people have trouble synthesizing things. And that is a lot of what, the balancing your mental hemispheres, the left and right hemisphere, gets you to the point where you can recognize that there's a lot of natural synthesis in the universe between opposing ideas, And an example, a physical world example of a synthesis is a man and a woman. By nature, the bodies are designed to come together, and the product of that encounter is a baby. So it's sort of like there's a synthesis of genetics. Okay, so if someone needs a very real world example, there it is. But you can also have concepts or colors. Red plus blue equals purple. So there's a lot of natural synthesis in nature. And then there's a lot of manipulation of synthesis, like in the Hegelian dialectic that is talked about, used by Karl Marx and used in modern Marxist Psyops. So let's go on to the next one. We're going to get into the particular individual Psyops. Okay. So let's look at some major psychological operations. All of these are going to be controversial. A lot of people watching this are going to be under effect, more or less, of one or more of these psyops. I've been fooled by several of them, I'll admit to that. And I'm not really here tonight, and we don't have the time to prove or disprove any of these psyops. I just want to kind of touch on each one and cover them and talk about what is the psychological element being used in each of these psyops. Okay, so and I started with the most recent one, and you talked earlier about the 60s and 70s. That's going to be at the bottom there, the end of the Vietnam War, the end of the hippie movement. So let's start.
It's like doing war, waging war, and then asking for peace at the same time. It's incredible. It's incredible, and people swallowed it, like would say Mark, swallow. It's incredible. It's terrifying. I put this there, this psyop with the COVID-19 at the same heights. It changed everything. It's a culture changing psyops. It's really bad. Really bad.
Absolutely, and it paved the way. And at the end of this, we can interview and talk some more and expand on some of these. But the reason I have that, I made sure that fit. I mean, I had to kind of squeeze it in, right? Because it's such a fundamental psyop. It changed our nation so much. And it also goes along with the second one from the bottom, the assassinations. That was what was used to destroy hope and peace and progress that was being made by humanity. So let's start at the top, because that's the most recent one, the one that's most real to all of us. We've got the COVID-19 depopulation through medical tyranny. And that's still going on. They're changing it. They're tweaking it. There's rumors of another one. They're relying on an injection that is being used not only to make people sick, but to put them under mind control through various configurations of, let's just say, mechanisms that respond to electromagnetic radiation like 5G.
I mean, all the list there. It's fear. It's fear mongering.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Psychological operations are based on fear. That was such an obvious point to me. I kind of missed it while I was putting this together. It should have been on the previous page as one of the main things. That Psyops do depend on fear in order to drive you down into survival thinking and lessen your rationality and your ability to analyze. So let's look at what the COVID-19 PSYOP consists of. It rests on some earlier ones. The germ theory has been going on for a long time. It's what drives allopathic medicine, modern medicine. Get people afraid of a little thing that they can't see. And I'm not dismissing actual pathogens and concentrations of bacteria that get into food sometimes and cause food poisoning. But I'm just talking about your ordinary virus and flu and polio and things like that that are said to be viruses and be transmitted. The more you get into that, the more that you can dispel that. And I've really encouraged people. It's such a fundamental because what's coming up all depends. Your fear and your terror are going to be there as long as you don't dispel that fear and terror with good information. So I encourage people to really research the germ theory, the terrain theory, the work of these brave doctors that came out and spoke out against the false information being pumped out in COVID-19 propaganda. And there are heroes. A lot of people may or may not know that the Spanish flu was the same thing. They injected a huge population of people, all of their soldiers, brought them back onto U.S. soil. They mixed around with people. There was shedding on that vaccine, just like there is shedding now. And so that had a lot to do with that pandemic over 100 years ago. So it's worth a study all in its own to see how similar these are. And it was the PSYOP its own. They had to lie to people. They had to fool them. They had to blame. They actually killed people with the cure, just like we're seeing now, where you go to a hospital and you get a toxic mix in your IV and it winds up killing you. They did the same thing with aspirin, overdoses of aspirin in the Spanish flu. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, they actually what they achieved during the pandemic is it makes you think, how much of what we're living in is real, how much of what we learned in school and what our parents told us. And
Right.
it makes you question everything.
Yeah, it sure does. They have been working on this one for a long time. And in case you didn't notice, they've thrown in all their chips on this bet that they know that if they lose big and they lose everything. And they know that if they win humanity. And so it's quite an operation they have going. So they put a lot of time into it. And I'm not saying they knew they were going to do this way back during the Spanish flu, but they sure used a successful past action in planning the next one.
Convincing people they're sick even if they're not.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So, and that goes along with psychosomatic illness, and that's another study all of its own. So in preparing this, I've been working on this for a week. Just the other day, QAnon did a new drop, And most people will know what QAnon's about. Some people feel betrayed by it. I did, because I took some stock in it. You know, I was a little bit skeptical, but I was really big on the idea of ending child trafficking, going down into the underground tunnels and making arrests of these bad people. And I had, during the COVID PSYOP, I felt pushed down, and my isolated, and my thinking wasn't very broad. And I fell for some elements of this. And I'm very thankful that I saw a video of a guy who decoded, and of course the video's gone because YouTube censorship, but it decoded beautifully the whole QAnon operation. It's the use of its numerology, deep occult numerology, the kind that Mark Passio teaches. I wish I could find that video again, but that helped me to disentangle from that. And then I got pulled into it again, with the stolen election. So I'm trying, I've been studying Passio for several years now, and I'm trying to extricate all this lingering belief in the state and government and propaganda. And I think I'm finally almost there. But there were some times when it looked like it was all or nothing, and that the only solution was going to be political. They stole the election, it means our country's going to hell, and it did. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it was going to go there anyway, no matter who won, because it's not about who's president. Once you get out of that PSYOP, you're on your way. There's
QAnon, I've seen through it from the first moment. Personally, first of all, it comes from politicians, and what our politicians do, they're lying all the time. And what the difference between one politician or another? They're different. They're the same liars. They don't care. And I've have people around me that have been swallowed by the QAnon PSYOP, and they were telling me nonsense. I was like, how do you manage to reconcile the fact that you think you can unbreak politician with other politicians? It doesn't work. It's totally it's nonsensical. Actually, it's like an oxymoron. If it's like, and then it's like a thesis and antithesis at the same time. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You cannot. Is it Einstein that told us that you cannot solve a problem with a solution at the same level? Well, people didn't learn at all, and they swallowed it. At the risk of repeating myself, it's the best word I got for it. It got swallowed by the propaganda and all the mystery behind the Q. Is it on Reddit? It was happening. Reddit.
It was on 4chan, I think, some 4chan. Website that was dedicated to discussion of that. Yes. Yeah. Now I want to point out that QAnon got a lot of people waking up and going, especially on the international pedophilia and sex trafficking, and the criminality of the elites. And it was 4chan, and so QAnon wasn't all bad. Actually, that at great risk, they put the QAnon PSYOP out there, and it actually got a lot of people interested in waking up and really enthusiastic about digging for more information. So a lot of people got educated there. I don't want to put it all down as a complete loss, because a lot of elements of the QAnon thing helped encourage people to do their own research.
I agree, but still, people will keep going back to the machine. They'll still.
let's talk about what the psychological effect was, because
Yes.
our whole presentation is about how this paralyzes the freedom movement. And we can't let this happen again, because they're going to hit
Hmm.
us with another wave and many other
You're right.
waves.
You're right.
So I had the benefit of kind of a friend of mine that I've known for a long time, connected to. I was involved in Scientology, and he has written a couple of books, and he has gone on and done other things. Whereas I continue to research the inner work that is part of that. And that's a subject for another show. But basically, he introduced me to Douglas Dietrich's work, and got me interested in Douglas Dietrich, who is a fascinating person. He worked for Michael Aquino, and he was one of the first persons to connect QAnon to Aquino. And Aquino, as you know from my first slide, is very much involved with mind war and psychological operations. And we have every reason to believe that the QAnon psyop was engineered. Obviously, it's, he's not around anymore, so it's not still some, it's been handed over to special operations. But the basic plan of the QAnon psyop rests on another psyop, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on it, but the communists used it in early communist Russia. And it was a almost identical psyop, saying that the good guys were going to take back, the country from communism. Everybody stand down, be cool, don't rise up. And that was basically what happened right when people are starting to get irritated about the fact that the two weeks to stop the spread was turning into 2 months. That's when QAnon really went into full motion. And all of the opinion leaders, they call them opinion leaders, or you can call them mavens, did their work in the alternative media, telling people, look, hey, this is going to come out all right. Just as long as you sit back and wait, everything will be fine.
I just want to add that you're right. I agree with you about the QAnon. There was some good emerged from that. There was because I'm gonna see it. Something has been built up. There's a few individual who got together. And have you heard about the Canadian trucker assembly that happened in Ottawa?
Yes, that was awesome.
Okay, so a lot of them were QAnons. They were still the spirit is there, but they're confusing. They're totally confused about, because they don't know, they don't know about all that. And it's good, because I met some of them, and I'm still meeting them, and I'm gonna see them this weekend. And they're very good people. It really showed the well-intentioned people. There's a lot of them who felt comfortable to step forward and just show their awakening, because I'm using quotes there, because I don't believe in anything of that. But yes, there was a 3%er spirit that emerged from the QAnon. Absolutely.
Very good. Yes, that's true. And those people are waking up and doing their research and seeing what's going on, and that's a good thing. Now,
Yes.
I found my note here. It was a Bolshevik psyop in the 1920s called Operation Trust. Look that up, Operation Trust. You will find the QAnon psyop was already done. Okay, so some of these things are not new. All right, I want to go through this really quickly so that we don't go over time. I'm just going to summarize this. Like I said, I'm not going to prove or disprove flat Earth, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things that made me aware very quickly of what was. I'm proud to say I didn't fall for this one for very long. It was like, watching a 2-hour video and I thought, could it be? Could it be? I was open to the idea that it could be that way. Now, I began to realize that the flat earth was a reboot of an old feudalism, the flat earth before Christopher Columbus days. The idea that this world is just, we're living in kind of a terrarium, or, it's an aquarium with dirt in it, a terrarium. We're living in kind of a terrarium that's surrounded by the walls of Antarctica. And God made it, there's nothing we can do about it. There's no need for a spherical universe, a universe that's round with round planetary objects. No, we're living in some kind of simulation, which there's some truth to that. There is a matrix, and the matrix is actually built by what we're talking about. It's built by Psyops, and those Psyops so distort our reality that we live in our own little bubbles, and we don't see what's actually going on in reality. But flat Earth is one of those that depends on, accepting that there's no free randomity in space. It's not a bunch of balls that are bound to collide into each other. It's all just a box that we live in, that, the sun somehow turns and rotates, and it's not the earth doing it. And basically the message of it, and the timing of this PSYOP that came out of NASA, and that's why you get such professional looking models and videos on this. It's just, they really put a lot of money into this one. So it really has captivated a lot of people. But basically its message is, your place is to be a slave. We're going back to feudalism. The earth really is flat, and they expect you to believe that all these scientists and breakthrough thinkers and guys that were persecuted by the church, and that saw planets in their telescope were just, so you have to put all these things aside in order to embrace this PSYOP, a lot of truth. But, like I said, we're not getting into proving or disproving. I'm just pointing out some of the psychological things that go along with it.
Can I add something about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So usually when I'm stumbling onto flat earthers, I'm asking them the question. So I'm gonna ask them to the people who will listen to that, who think that the earth is flat. So what if it's real? Okay, let's say it's real. The earth is flat, okay? And there's a disc that floating, the sun is floating all around. So what? What are you gonna do after that? Even if they come with the truth and tell the people that flat earth is the truth, what after? What is it gonna change on the actual context and the actual situation? It's irrelevant. It's waste of energy. Actually, it's incredible. It's wasted. It's wasted intellectualism. It's wasted. These truthers that are getting caught in it and they're getting trapped in it. They're lost after that. You cannot convince them of the contrary. Even if you're showing them how physics actually works, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, good points. Very good points. And you're right. If you're a flat earther and you want to view spherical Earth as a psyop, let's entertain that for a moment. It's still a distraction. So this would fall under the category of a huge distraction operation. We're not fixing things or changing anything on planet Earth, whether it's flat or round.
Yeah.
So on to the next one. Climate change caused by man-made global warming. I just wanted to put that up there. So I don't want to really dig into that too deeply. It started out with, or it's become demonizing carbon dioxide, which our plants and our food growth desperately need. And so when we need carbon dioxide to increase plant growth, we're getting it taken away. And then there's a whole geoengineering with the chemtrails that goes along with that is actually making, whatever they're attributing to climate change is actually making it worse. But there's other experts that go into that. Dane Wigington, and at the end of our slides, I'll have some links for Dane and his work. World War II history. This is another very important one that's distracting a lot of people. So we all know that, there have been films produced. One of them is called the Greatest Story Never Told, and the other one's called Europa. And all of these are very well-produced films. They put a lot of money into them. And yeah, you are the carbon they want to reduce. Very good. That's so true. The condition of slavery still exists no matter what. So on World War II history, what they've done is they successfully blamed Hitler for every part of the Holocaust. Okay, Hitler obviously hated Jews. He had a big problem with them. Both his book and his work were to find a country and to relocate them. And that's pretty much what he did, according to even the modern historians that have looked into it. So those movies you're being shown are showing some important truths that have been kept from us, like the bombing of Dresden, the firebombing, the murder of German civilians towards the end of the war by the Allies. And so it's bringing up some very important history, but at the same time, propagandizing people about how Hitler, who is like the ultimate in tyranny and government and dictatorship, is somehow not that bad a guy. Okay, so he wasn't the prime engineer of the Holocaust, but he knew about it and he approved of it. The prime engineer was obviously Himmler and the men that were above him in the shadows, and that comes most probably from the Vatican. Himmler was himself a Jesuit priest. And then we have, so Hitler was blamed, and then Hitler's exonerated by these new films, which he, definitely should not be exonerated, because millions of people did die at his hand under the might of the state, and nothing was solved. And including his, he ruined his own country, if you want to call it his country. He was from Austria, but he ruined Germany and Austria in the process. So what this has done is all of this misinformation about World War II, which some of it comes from the Zionists and some of it comes from the anti-Zionists. And so what you get is these two extremes. And so you get problems with what really happened during the Holocaust. And like I said, I'm not here to give my opinion one way or the other, but I will admit or tell you that you've been lied to, and some of those films reveal some of the ways you've been lied to. And, that there's controversy about Auschwitz, for example, and the gas chambers and things like that are scientific things that can be looked into and have been looked into in court cases. So there's been misinformation coming from both sides, and it's really important to realize that there is plenty of documentation and evidence for the fact that Jews were killed in camps in various ways, not all of them by gassing, and maybe none of them by gassing. Even if nothing happened with the gassing, you still have millions of people murdered and millions of non-Jews as well as Jews. So
Canada, United States, England, France are all in it. They are all proponents of war, of World War II. So we're not talking about only the Russians and the German. The German people there were victims of this tyrannic, totalitarian system, government that has been like fascism. Well, you want to know something? They're not dead. They never been they never disappeared from here in Canada, and you can see it everywhere. They're everywhere. The fascists, they are everywhere, and you can see it in their symbolism. And you can, if you have the eyes to see, if you can read symbolism, they're everywhere, everywhere. In Canada, we have, I've seen even the Ukrainian fascist symbol on a car.
Yeah,
I've seen the symbol of fascism of Ukraine on the car here in Canada. So it's really here. They never went away. Never.
yeah. So we have to keep in mind that mass murder is the product of government, and sometimes that government is mother Russia, sometimes it's father Germany, sometimes it's extreme left communism, totalitarian communism, and it's extreme right totalitarian fascism. So what we need to do is what I alluded to earlier, and that is become a master of synthetic thinking, knowing that there are two flavors of the same thing. There are two flavors of totalitarianism coming from the right and the left, and it doesn't do any good to line up on one side and point fingers at the other, because basically the real cause is the belief in government, that assigns powers to disarm people, to take them away to camps. All those things come from people giving away their power to governments. So let's go into the last couple here. The 9/11 attacks. Those, a lot of people that are in the truth movement have already done their research on this. There was a third building that came down in its own footprint. It wasn't hit by a plane, and it was imploded. In other words, taken down by explosions, and deliberately. And so there's no one can say now that the 9/11 attacks were not an incredibly huge psyop. In fact, one of the psyops that they needed to take back the explosion of truth seeking on the internet that was happening in the late 90s when the internet first came on. So one of my favorite psyops, because I come out of this generation. I wasn't in the hippie movement, and I wasn't I was born in the 60s, and I looked up to the musicians and the uncles and cousins that were part of this movement. I wasn't old enough for the draft, and so young men were being drafted without a chance to go back home and say goodbye and pack. And they were sent straight to boot camp and then overseas to a war at the age of 18 and 19. And so we had these murderous, brutal wars that were done to open up drug trade routes. And the whole psyop was they were running both sides of the game. They were running, we've got to defeat communism, so you've got to come fight this war. And then there were you got to be against the war because we should be about peace. And so they got in on both sides there, and they did a beautiful two-handed left-right psyop on all of America. And then when they were done with the hippies, the couple years that they co-opted that movement, then they destroyed the hippie movement with a series of psyops in 1969, one of which was Charles Manson. So since we're running short on time, let's go to the last couple slides, and we'll hopefully maybe get a chance to talk about a couple of these that are of interest. Okay. Oh, good. So this is the last slide pretty much. There's one more slide if we have time for it, but this is the main one. These are the resources. Okay. I just want to go over these real quick. It may be a little hard to see them, but you can freeze your screen maybe. I'll try to, on the Facebook post, I'll try to post these links there if they'll let me.
I'm going to add them on YouTube afterward.
That would be great. Okay. So Mark Passio, a lot of us know his work already. If you don't know his work, you should check it out on whatonearthishappening.com. And he teaches a lot about the fundamentals of the mind and how we are mind controlled and the roots of Psyops. So we got a One Great Work t-shirt there. And I'm part of the One Great Work Network, and hopefully I'll get to post this on my One Great Work channel. Michael Hoffman, Mark Passio I got the middle initial wrong. I think it's Michael A. Hoffman. I was in a rush. Michael A. Hoffman has been promoted by Mark Passio and his book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Very advanced. If you really want to know the symbolism that the dark occultists use for all of their psyops and their operations, the mass murders and the, what do they call it? Serial killer murders. His book is a valuable reference, and his material as well. He has his own website. It's revisionisthistory.org. And for those of you who have gotten into the There Was No Holocaust psyop, Michael E. Hoffman will be good to read because he is under attack from the Zionists for coming up with his own kind of middle of the road theory, what did and didn't happen around the Holocaust, that's based on really good research. This is a great guy to check out. If you want to know a little bit more about Flat Earth and you're in the younger generation, Colin Smith is wonderful. He's a truther that has his own website, www.liftingtheveil.tv, and he's got several videos that talk about all the aspects of Flat Earth. Climate change caused by man-made global warming. I encourage you to get into Mike Adams. He's one of the most heavily censored guys on the internet. You cannot even post a link to Mike Adams on Facebook. So you may not know about him. Check him out. He's called the Health Ranger. He's got his own website, naturalnews.com. And once you get there, you can do searches on carbon dioxide and just about any topic. And he does a daily show that keeps up with current events. And he's a really good psyop buster. Let's call him psyop busters because these guys really take them apart. We talked about geoengineering and Dave Wigington. Geoengineeringwatch.org. World War II history, a very interesting, for those of you who really want to get into this, it's really heavy reading and heavy realization to find this one out. But the Holocaust is actually worse than even the Zionists say, but in its own way. And I'm not going to give any more of it away. I encourage you to try to check out oneevil.org. And of course, they're killing our internet right now. There we go. Oneevil.org, and there's a big long, it's no longer on the internet, so you have to use the Wayback Machine to get to it. If you're on Facebook and you want to write to me, I'd be happy to provide you the link so that you can do this research. If you're interested at all, please contact me and get into this because this is something people need to know. And then the end of Vietnam War opposition. If you don't know about Miles W. Mathis, he does a lot of great papers, and he's a good scientist in his own right. He's an amateur scientist, and he's a psyop buster. I don't agree with everything he says. He says some things are psyops that I'm still not convinced, but he does wonderful research on genealogy and photos. He's an artist, and he really breaks up these psyops like the Charles Manson psyop. He does a good article on that. And another one that's worth, I gave it a mention here because it's 1 hour packed with amazing truth. If you're from that era and you're interested in this Charles Manson psyop and why they wanted to take down the hippie movement, Mae Brussel was a fantastic researcher, and there's an interview with her in 1971 that's posted onto YouTube, and that's part of the I forget. Anyway, it's posted on YouTube. You can find it with those search terms, deconstructing the Charles Manson psyop. And I promise you that's 1 hour just packed with information. She moves at a fast pace and really gets it in there. And there's also a book. Oh, I skipped over that. David Mcgowan wrote a book called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. If you're from the older generation and that hippie music stuff, you want to know what happened to your bands, what they were doing back then. A lot of them were in Laurel Canyon, the same place Charles Manson was. And a lot of them were connected to an Air Force Psyop, a studio up there in the canyon. Several studios in the canyon. The Beach Boys lived there. The Beatles visited. A lot of your favorite name groups from the 1970s came out of Laurel Canyon. So you'll want to check that out.
Does it talks about the relation between rock bands and Tuesday Welsh, the head of the Satanic Church of the 70s? Yes, that's an old other podcast we could like. It's fascinating.
Yeah, he does touch on that. He does touch on, and the first snuff film or ritual killing captured on film is talked about in the book, and that happened at Altamont in December 1969. A black man attending the show was knifed to death by one of the security guards, and nothing ever really happened. You know, it was a ritual satanic murder done in a rock concert. So he talks about that there. David Mcgowan does. So all of those are great resources for researching psyops. I don't know how much time we left, but we can talk some more about individual psyops if you want, or we can entertain a few comments.
We have like maybe, let's say, 10 minutes for now, and we can do another one if you want to. And in the near future, we can continue the conversation because there's so much stuff to talk about and cover.
Oh, sure. So, I would love to come back and do some more. And if we don't forget, there's one more slide, but leave this one up there for now. Leave this one up there while we talk about, if you want to talk about anything for a few minutes.
I just want to bring up because we never talk too much about the solutions.
Right.
We can expose the walls of the prison all day long, and describe it, and it's all fascinating. But I just want to bring a moment for to give people hope and maybe a trick or two. You know, you're into healing too, so it's I think it's a good way to go on solutions. So I'm gonna put mine first. You fight the only way to fight mind control and psychological operation is to be aware of it. So it's very important for people to educate themselves about all these things. So if you have interest into a certain subject, knowledge is the key. Knowledge is the key every time. So when I got into the great work, and I was fascinated by psychology, and that's why I'm more into that now. It's because of mind control and psyops operation. We all went through this rabbit hole of conspiracy and things like that. So there's a way to balance this thing. You know, there's a way to keep yourself into it, the rabbit hole, but having an exit when you need it. And I think the shadow work is the best way to deal with that, because you will find not you necessarily, Scott, but the people who will listen to it, if you get into shadow work, you're gonna unveil the deception of your own mind control. And it's really important to be aware of it be aware of what kind of weapons are used against you, because they're attacking at from everywhere at the same time. The food is attacked. There's a psyop on food. They're
Yes.
telling you, oh, don't eat that because it's not good for you, but it's all the contrary. And then you have the media, and then you have your culture, and then you have everything like that. So my trick for me, I had to go back in my temple and go back and healing myself from this, because we encounter in shadow work, you encounter that you reveal these lies that you built, you've been built on, so it's psyop operation that influenced us all our life, our taste, all molded, and even the way you act, the way you, and it's really important to get back in your temple and clean it before getting into this stuff, because it's really dark. The whole, it's deep and dark, really dark. So
That's a great point. And if you want to get into the last slide, I will talk about my
yes,
work, which is the inner work, and Fred was just describing
yes,
the the um, the importance of cleaning your own house and becoming strong as an individual so that you can stand up to evil. Because ultimately, this is going to lead us into the war. We're in a war on evil, whether you like it or not, or know it or not. And you're going
yes,
to know we're in a war on evil, and you're going to need these tools. Now,
yes,
my work involves, you may recognize a slide from earlier because I've categorized things into 4 different categories. But now you'll see my work on the far right, and that just shows you different levels and stages. And I'm going to summarize those for people who are, just doing inner work that they can get a hold of, like what Mark Passio suggests to do. Look at yourself in the mirror, stop lying to yourself. That's at the bottom there. Get your life in order.
yep,
Exchange and survival. Right livelihood. You should be your survival should depend on, not on, going being the security guard at the hospital that's killing somebody every day with the protocol. But and I had to leave the profession of school teaching because I was not going to be a teacher enforcing everybody got to wear a mask and restrict your oxygen, just because that's what the school board decided to do. So I got out of that. I still teach some to homeschool groups over the internet. So I'm still teaching, but I quit my profession. I quit my cult, as it were. And you have to get your exchange and survival. We're looking at the bottom here because you have to start at the bottom. You have to start where you are.
yep,
And once you've got your survival, under control, and you can get, Mark Pastor was talking about today in his, you can get a simple, at least a laptop where you can start doing some work that you can share.
yep,
Um, you can step up to the next one and start working on yourself and your relationships in life, and your relationship with your past. What happened when you were growing
yes,
up? What kind of beliefs did you have? What kind of traumas did you experience? Are you willing to contact those traumas on your own and do what I call journaling? Write down what happened and write
yes,
down uh, how it feels now, and sort of begin to come out of these past traumatic situations or past failures or divorces or things that are holding you down. That's where you clean up your life, your this present lifetime. Now, when you get advanced into the inner work, you're going to do one of 2 things. You're either going to do deep emotional therapy, and I'm looking at the mental realm here, where you really get into, maybe by watching certain movies that trigger you, or by uh, just doing some of the emotional work that uh, we can start finding links. I'm going to be sharing that, and maybe in our next podcast we'll talk about how we can get started with the inner work. That would be a great show right there.
Oh,
Because
yes.
as you get into this realm, you are less and less the effect of their psyops. You're more and more immune to them because you're a stronger person. Your mind
Yep.
is stronger. And by stronger, I don't mean you're insensitive. I don't mean you've become tough and developed in a shell, which, to some degree, you gotta be a little leathery. You gotta have some shields against what they're throwing at us, and you've got to toughen up. But you also got to tenderize a little bit, as well. Inner work is very demanding of people because they often say, "Oh, I'm tough. I want to get tough. I do my workouts and things like that," especially among males. But it requires, you were a kid once, and when you were a kid, you were overwhelmed and traumatized, and you're not going to get through that being just tough. Okay, you're going to have to maybe cry a little, maybe get in touch with some emotions inside. And that's not easy for people to do. So we're talking about advanced work on these top two levels. But once you get through that mental work, and in my operation or in other practices such as past life regression, things like that, you get deeper into your mind as to where all these things come from. Where do my purposes and ideas come from? What's my purpose? What am I doing here on planet Earth? What was I sent here? Did I decide to come here? All those things start to come to light when you really get into advanced spiritual work. Okay, so those are the top two levels. And you get into your fixed ideas. You get into confronting evil, really confronting evil and what it really is, and the evil inside yourself. You get into games, goals, and opposition. And then finally you can start with the spiritual, and it's good to do all of these levels together, but it's also good to know that you really need to focus on the lower levels first and then move up along with your ability.
Yep.
And kind of formalize your path and get into things that will help you move through these areas, because I've identified all of these areas have been identified as places that we need to work in order to be able to advance and become stronger, and at the same time stronger and more capable of compassion for all life. So those things go together hand in hand. They're two pillars sitting apart, but they begin to merge as you become a powerful individual spiritual being and you really live in your purpose, like Mark Passio has been teaching in his talks of inner work lately in his shows. So at the very top, you're in touch with eternity and all existence. And this is where people communicate with their higher power or with the great spirit, or however you want to, or with natural law, however you want to view that. And really get to the core, which is where you can really become empowered to come back down the levels and see these from a higher perspective and really straighten out your life. So you go up and down the scale and you move through and you hit all these areas of inner work, and you'll find that they come up when you do inner work on trauma. Near the bottom there, you'll find out that issues about communication begin to come up, and you need to work on your communication. You need to work on your problems. How do you confront and manage problems? So all of these inner work areas are being mapped out, and I'm in future shows I'm going to share with you. It's all free. It's called freescientology.us is my main website, and there's a lot of good material there. And we can even talk about the Scientology cult and how a lot of this knowledge was sequestered in the cult, so that the man on the street outside of the cult that didn't join and pay their life savings to get through these levels, didn't have access to it. and some of it's related to the light Freemasonry stuff that Mark teaches, and some of it's new. It was actually discovered in the movement, just from experience of sitting across from another person and what's in their mind. And all of these things are new discoveries, and I'm really excited to share them. But that's a scope of another show. So I really, it's about all I have to say, and I think that's about all the time we got. But I really
Yes.
appreciate you having me.
Oh no, thank you for being there for maybe it's the fourth show together. I think you've been in the LIBERcast since the beginning. You are one of the first hosts I brought on the LIBERcast. So thank you very much for being there and sharing this information, this important information. We have to share it far and wide for everybody to hear it, and um, we're gonna do a continuation of this one there, because there's so much to cover, and I'm very interested in your work, and I'm always curious, and at the same time we're here to heal. So it's important to be humble into it. Like I change the first thing I did is change what I did with my body. So it's always like we're you see it in exchange and survival. So it start there. So it's really important stuff, and it's fascinating. And I want to see your explication on that more deeper. So I want to thank you again, and thank you people to our joining us, James, and being there. And it's awesome comments we have there. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next episode. And let's heal together, and let's make it happen. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.